The Gemara that we learned yesterday on page 6a was about, we started with the law of the grapes that it talks about by a Nazir, and that the Torah says from the 7 species that one of them is grapes, and grapes has a certain law that is specifically applicable to grapes, which has to do with the measuring the size of a revius for a Nazir. And Rashi explained to us that it had to do with using items that a Nazir is prohibited in having. So according to at least one opinion over there, it has to do with the different vegetation from the grapevine. There's the seeds, and then there's the leaves of the grapevine. And if you mixed it all together with grapes and so on, and you had the size of a revius, that would be the person would be liable if he's a Nazir. And we explained how Rashi understands it is that you would use a method of measuring that amount by putting it into a cup of wine, and the displacement being the correct measure. So it had to do with displacement, and there's a difference of displacement if it's using wine or water. And so the Torah specifically mentions the geffen because that's what you need to use in order to measure a revius of displacement for these prohibited foods for the Nazir. And then the Gemara mentioned about the fig, which is applicable for the laws of Shabbos, carrying. It's an important law to know because a lot of us live in cities where there's Eruv, so a lot of times we forget that there's a prohibition of carrying Shabbos. Very important to always remember that, especially because you travel to different places and you forget about it. So also sometimes there are certain times when the Eruv is down, especially here in Florida, where we have these hurricanes and windstorms and so on, and people have to be aware of the prohibition of hoitza'ah on Shabbos, carrying on Shabbos. And so that's applicable for the liability of that is if it's the size, any food item that's the size of a gregeres, which is a dried fig. And then the next case was it was zayas, and that has to do with almost all measurements of the Torah are the size of an olive. And then we mentioned for Yom Kippur the size of a koseves, which is a large date. And then the Gemara ultimately reached the question, and that was, so what is it? Are all these measurements biblical, or are they halacha l'maisha misinai? Are they a tradition? Is it written in the Torah, or is it an oral tradition? And the Gemara's answer is it's called asmachta. And we explained yesterday that there's a big machlokes what asmachta really means. It's a famous argument between the Ritva and the Rambam. If asmachta means that Hashem hinted in the Torah something that he would like, even though he didn't obligate you. And so the Ritva wants to learn that generally asmachta means that there's a hint in the Torah for certain things, and Hashem really wants you to do it, but Hashem didn't obligate you, and he waited for the rabbis to make certain decrees. That's generally the understanding of asmachta, according to the Ritva at least, that he waited, that in other words, it's really hinted to in the Torah already. There's a support for it from Hashem. In the Torah itself, there's support. Hashem wanted this, but he waited for the rabbis to prohibit it because he did not want to prohibit it himself. Hashem did, sort of like left it open, but this is what he really wants. And so the rabbis came and they were soymech their decree on a pasuk, on a verse. They had support from a verse. And the Rambam doesn't learn that way. The Rambam learns that asmachta means it's just there's the rabbis found a hint in the Torah for a reminder, for a way for you for a good memory option or a symbol, so some way of reminding yourself of this law, of knowing the law. And so it's a man-made, this is, you would call it like a man-made item, this according to the Rambam, that the asmachta is a man-made item. In other words, it's the Chachamim, they found a hint, in the Torah, that will help you remember something. So that's the asmachta. And I just happened to I mentioned yesterday, it seems to me that even the Ritva that normally learns this whole concept of asmachta, he's generally referring to a case of a rabbinic decree that the rabbis relied on a pasuk. Our Gemara is a little different than the norm. Our Gemara is saying it's a halacha l'meishemi Sinai. It's a tradition that has an asmach, that has a hint in the Torah. Often, when you have the word asmachta, it's a rabbinic decree. It's rabbinical. It's a rabbinical rule, but the rabbis found the support in the Torah. It's very different than here, where we're saying it's Hashem's gave this as a tradition to Moses. He told it to Moses, and the rabbis found a little hint to it in the Torah, or a way of remembering.
Rabbi.
Okay. Yes.
So Purim and Oster,
right?
Is that? So would you say that that's according to Rambam or according to Ritva, or doesn't matter?
Well, it's a Gemara. They can't. Neither of them can argue with that. That would be, but again, that would be a case where the rabbis found a support in the Torah.
But the question is, did the rabbis find it, or Hashem put it there?
So, listen, even according to the Rambam, you have to explain, you have to know, you have to word it right. Even according to the Rambam, obviously Hashem knew all the future, and He knows the rabbis are going to find the hint, right? You can't say that Hashem didn't know, but we can still call it man-made, because according to the Rambam, it's the rabbis found the hint. They found something interesting in the Torah that they supported their decision to write a Megillah for Purim, because they found a hint in the Torah. And according to the Ritva, it's not that the rabbis found a hint in the Torah. It's Hashem initially wanted to tell us, write a Megillah, but He didn't spell it out. He wrote it as a hint. This is what He would like, and the rabbis understood the hint and they wrote it. So that would be like an example of this. Yeah, that would be a good example, though. So the Rambam sees it more like there happens to be a symbolic a verse that symbolizes such a thing. It hints to such a thing, and so on. And the Ritva says no. It's like Hashem was telling them do this, but He didn't spell it out, and He didn't obligate them. He said that this is what He would like, and that's how He wrote it. And the rabbis took the hint. Okay, so getting back to our Gemara, so our Gemara concludes that that there are three things that are halacha l'maishmi Sinai's, and one of them was the shiurim, and the other is chatzitzin, the laws of chatzitza, and the final law is mechitza. A little confusing. Chatzitzin and mechitza, very similar words, but these are two of the three things that are halacha l'maishmi Sinai's in the shiurim. So we explained the shiurim. The measurements are a tradition from God to Moses at Sinai. And then the Gemara talks about the chatzitzin, and we started talking about it yesterday, and that's the Gemara that we did. And chatzitzin is a law regarding mikvah, and it's a very applicable law even today, because women are obligated to go to the mikvah and once a month, and even after they are post their menopause, but still they have to go to mikvah once after they finish after they stop menstruating, they have to go to mikveh at least once in order for them to be pure for the rest of their life. So, and when they go to mikveh, they can't have any chatzitza. What is a chatzitza? Chatzitza could be like nail polish. If they have nail polish on, that would be a separation between their fingers and the mikveh.
Or a Band-Aid.
Band-Aid, right, for sure. So there are many things that would be considered a chatzitza. Another chatzitza would be wearing clothing. They're wearing a bathing suit. And that would normally be a chatzitza. Now, there are ways around these problems, like, for example, if it was a very loose bathing suit and so on. So there could be ways around it. But of course, the appropriate way to go to mikveh is 100%. You don't have any intervening substance, any questions about it at all. Now, if they forgot their ring on them when they went to mikveh, that would be a major problem because that's a chatzitza. Now, what our Gemara tells us, and this is this is an interesting fact about halacha l'maisha misinai, that halacha l'maisha misinai really gives us leniencies. According to the letter of the law, we would have assumed that biblically, if a woman forgot her ring on her, so according to the letter of the law, biblical law, we would say that would be a puzzle, invalid mikveh. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, the tradition that's given to Moses, tells us, guess what? It's not as strict as you think. The tradition given to Moses at Sinai minimizes the stringency of the law and tells you, no, there's some leniencies. So it's not that the halacha l'Moshe Sinai is coming to give us an extra rule in prohibition. It's actually qualifying the prohibition to say that the biblical prohibition doesn't apply in all cases.
Hey, Betty.
And what that means is that
come here.
We keep in mind that even if something is permitted according to biblical law, but that doesn't mean rabbinically it's okay. It could still be a problem rabbinically, and a person would have to go back to mikveh. For example, if a woman realizes afterwards she had her ring on during the mikveh, so she would go back to the mikveh afterwards and go again. Why? Rabbinically. Biblically, she wouldn't need to. Why not? Because according to the letter of the law, according to the Torah, it would sound like no intervening substance at all. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai, the tradition from Hashem to Moses at Sinai, tells us no, the rule of intervening substances applies only if it covers the majority of your body. And because it would only apply if it is something that you're particular about and you don't want. So rabbinically, these things don't matter, and we basically would tell you to go back to the mikvah. But according to the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, it permits you that, in other words, according to halacha l'Moshe Sinai, if a woman wore her ring to the mikveh, and the rabbis never made any decree, that would be okay. She fulfilled her mikveh obligation. But because the rabbis made decrees, and the truth of the matter is, even after the rabbis' decrees, you might be able to find the leniency here. Why? Because a ring, she doesn't mind keeping on. She wants it to stay on, and it's not on majority of her body. So there would be room to say that this would be a case where even rabbinically it's kosher. However, in Shulchan Aruch, it's brought that we're makbid on all cases, any intervening substance, we basically we would have a woman go back to mikveh and redo it. According to our Gemara, it would seem like it's okay, but the Ramah, Shulchan Aruch, he says that we're makbid even for anything, Yes, Mark, Reuven.
No brachot when they go back in?
Now, that would be a good question, because in this scenario, a very good question, because in this scenario, it's really not an obligation with the ring, because it's not dirt. It's not something she's makbid on, right? She's not particular against having the ring on. She would keep it on. So maybe in that scenario, she probably wouldn't go say a bracha again. But in the normal case, she would. Like if it was a Band-Aid or something else, then probably she would go say another bracha. I would guess. Again, I'm not possibly just guessing that would be the halacha. Okay, so
It will require a little washing.
Okay, fine.
let me just mute everyone here. Okay, so getting back to the actual Gemara. So the Gemara's case was the Gemara brought a pasuk, and the pasuk says that v'rachatz es b'sarei b'mayim, that it says b'sarei b'mayim. That means that nothing can be chaytzitz, nothing can be intervened between the basar, the flesh, and the water. And the Gemara asks, so then what's this halacha l'maisha misinai telling us? So the Gemara then says, oh, you know what it's telling you? That it's not just something intervening your flesh, it's intervening from your hair, that you can't have anything intervening between your hair and the water, that even the hair has to be in contact with the water. And that's what initially the Gemara thought. So in other words, the pasuk tells you that you can't have any intervening substance between your body and the water. And a halacha l'maisha misinai must be telling you that your hair can't have any intervening substance between the hair and the water. But then the Gemara says, no, we have a pasuk that tells us about the hair as well. It says, "V'rachatz es b'sari b'mayim," and es hatafel b'sari. The word es includes the hair should be in the water. The hair also has to touch the water. So the pasuk seems to be very clear that not only does the body not allow to have intervening substances, the hair also can't have intervening substances. So the Gemara answers, yeah, the body and the hair can't have intervening substances. And here we have a big debate among the commentaries what this means. But the way Rashi understands it is that Rashi says, but you know what the halacha l'maisha misinai teaches you? It teaches you that the hair, it shouldn't have any intervening substances, but if it has less than majority, or if it has an intervening substance that you're not particular about, it's okay. This is the tradition given to Moses at Sinai, that it qualifies the law about the hair. So in other words, the way Rashi learns it, it's a continuation of the previous Gemara. The Gemara, first of all, thought that we're talking about intervening substance of the body. Then the Gemara said, no, we're talking about intervening substance of the hair. And then the Gemara says, well, we have a pasuk for the intervening substance of the hair. And then the Gemara continues along that train of thought and says, oh, we have a pasuk about the intervening substance about the hair, that you can't have any intervening substance. But halacha l'maisha misinai says about the hair, continuation of that idea. About the hair, you can't, it's only when it's a majority and it's just something you're particular about. So that's the way Rashi's learning, that it's specifically connected to hair, which would mean that the rest of your body, that you can't have any intervening substances. It's only the hair that we have a leniency from this halacha l'maisha misinai, that Hashem told Moshe that even though in the Torah it sounds like your hair can't have any intervening substance, it's only if it's majority and it's something you're particular. Now, Tosfos cannot handle such an idea. It can't only be talking about here. We have proofs from other Gemaras. There's a Gemara that talks about a person going to mikvah, a woman who's pregnant, and she goes to mikvah, and it mentions that the child doesn't need to go to mikvah, even though she's pregnant with the child, and she is an intervening substance around her body is an intervening substance around the child's body, and the implication over there is that it goes by the body, not just the that it talks about it over there is about the the fact that there's an intervening substance, and the idea would be that it's not just the hair, but we talk about the whole body having an issue with intervening substance. And another Gemara that he quotes has to do with vessels, utensils. I don't know if the word would be utensils. He talks about a saddle, and if it has a certain stain on it, and grease on it, and would that be considered a chatzitza, an intervening substance? And dam al begodoi, blood on a person's beged. So it talks about intervening substance even on a clothing, which implies that this whole law of the halacha l'Moshe Sinai is not some special law about hair. It applies to all types of things that have to go to mikvah. So Rashi sounds like there's only talking about hair. The Taisa says, how can you say that? We have other sources from other Gemaras that seem that the law of these leniencies of chatzitza, of the rules of these leniencies of chatzitza seem to apply even if it's not just hair. It applies to the entire body. Now, besides for Rashi, who sounds like it only applies to hair, there is a debate among the commentaries here as well. And the other commentaries, they say it applies to the whole body. But even when you talk about the whole body, there's a debate among the commentaries. There's one of you that holds that the body and the hair are two separate entities. So when we say majority, we only go by the body is majority of the body. The hair is majority of the hair. And each one has their own, they're learned from different verses. In other words, our Gemara learns two different sources that you can't have any intervening substance. That's a chatzitza. What is the source from our Gemara? One was that it says in the Torah, B'sarai b'mayim. And the other one was it says Es b'sarai. One taught about no intervening substances between your flesh and the mikvah. And the other taught about no intervening substances from your hair in the mikvah. Is that all one rule? In other words, that the whole body consists of your hair and your body. That's one way of learning. It's talking about the whole body. It's one pasuk tells you about the hair part. The other pasuk tells you about the body. And then basically it's teaching you that there's one entity called the body. And the body, it goes by majority. If you have majority of your body is covered over with an intervening substance and you're particular about it, then it is invalid, your mikvah. And if not, then biblically it would be okay. In other words, according to the halacha l'Moshe Sinai that teaches you that it's not a problem, and you'd only have to deal. It would only be a rabbinic thing. Now, that's one way of learning. The other way of learning is the fact is
what would be an example of something that covers the majority of your body, and you're not particular about it?
Well, if you're wearing a swimsuit, one of those full body swimsuits, right? You don't want to walk you don't want to walk to a wedding with that swimsuit, right? So you're particular about it where you're going. You're not going to go into shul with that swimsuit. You don't mind swimming with it, maybe deep waters, but also when you go to your friend's swimming pool, you also don't want to wear this huge swimsuit that covers your whole body and looks like you're scuba diving. Who knows what you look like with it. But so that type of thing is a covering majority of your body, and it's not considered a kosher mitzvah according to the biblical law. But if it was only a minority of your body, or if it was majority of your body but you don't care about it, for example, if you wore a nice I don't know what would be a majority of your body that you would keep on for the rest of your life. I don't know what that would be. That would be a problem. How do you have something covering the majority of your body that you plan on keeping on and you're not particular about it to take it off? I'm not exactly sure how that would work. That would be a little problematic. But what the case would be. But in any event, that's the law. I can't think of an example of that. But anyway, the point is, I guess it would apply really to vessels, utensils. Maybe that's where you would say this case, right? That was on your body, it would be a little hard to give an example, but maybe on a utensil, you could have such a thing. Something that covers a majority of it, and you want to keep it on it, some type of a, some way of decoration, maybe for a utensil that you're using, so you want to keep it on, and so it's majority, but it could be majority where you would keep it. Okay, so in any event, what I was getting at was that there is one other view. And the other view is that because our Gemara's source is there's two separate sources. One is that your hair can't have an intervening substance, and the other is your body can't have an intervening substance. So that means that each one is judged on their own. There is a rule about majority of your hair, and there's a rule about majority of your body. And majority of your body excludes the hair part. The majority of the body is just the body. The majority of the hair is just the hair, that it has a rule in its own right about the hair. If the majority of the hair is covered, and that would be a case where you could have examples, where someone has a majority of their hair covered, maybe. So that would be a case. That would be a different halacha. In other words, that would change the halacha. You look at them separate entities, then it would have a different halacha. You look at the whole body includes the head, then it has, of course, there's a much larger area that would need to be covering a person intervening to make a problem. But if you hold their separate entities, then it's just covering the hair. It would be a problem. Would be covering the majority of the hair would be a intervening substance. So these are the two ways of learning the Gemara. And then we said Rashi, which doesn't seem to fit with other Gemaras, he seems to say it only applies to the hair. And that's where Tues is not comfortable with explaining it, with understanding it that way. And therefore, Tues learns differently. Now, so getting back to the actual wording in our Gemara. So the wording in our Gemara was that you have this halacha l'Moshe Sinai, this tradition given to Moses at Sinai, that is going to teach us, and this is in 6b, that even though the Torah says you can't have an intervening substance, it only applies if it's the majority. And again, we'll have to translate the majority. We basically now have three interpretations. It either means the majority of the hair, or it means the majority of the body without the hair, or the majority of the hair without the body, or it means the majority of the entire body, including the hair. However you learn that, but it's majority. We'll just call it majority. So we have the three interpretations of majority, and it's something that he's particular about, or she's particular about, and it's makbid olav. Then you have a problem of chatzitza, intervening substance in the mikvah. V'she'enai makbid olav. But if it's something that you are not makbid, v'she'enai makbid olav, if it's something that you're not particular about, even if it covers the majority of your body, it is not a problem of chatzitza. It's not a problem. Not an intervening substance. It's covering majority of your body, or maybe covering majority of your hair. It's covered, but you're not particular about it. You don't mind if it's there, and you don't need to take it off. You can keep it on, and it's not chatzitza. It's not a problem. So that's the special halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and it teaches us this leniency, really. Now, the rabbis did make zerus. The rabbis made zerus v'gazru al rubai she'enai makbid mishum rubai hamakbid. They made a decree about the majority of. They made a decree about majority of the body, that a person is not particular if it's covering. And they said because it's it's similar to rubai hamakbid. It's similar to a majority of the body that a person is particular about. And they also made a decree about miyutai, val miyutai, also about a minority of the body, if a person is particular about mishum rubai hamakbid, because that's close, similar to if it's covering the majority of the body in his particular body. And the Gemara then says, why don't we make a full decree and say even more? Let's say that what happens if something's covering the minority of your body and you're not particular about it? Let's say that should also be prohibited because you might come to permit something that's covering minority of your body that you are particular. Or inami mishum rubai she'ena makbid. But we should be machmir, even if it's covering a minority that you are not particular about, because you might come to permit a case of majority that you're not particular about. And the Gemara answers, "He gufa gzeira v'ana nekum nigzer gzeira l'gzeira." That itself is a decree, and we're going to go and make a decree on a decree. So the Gemara's conclusion actually here seems to spell out that if a woman left her ring on during the mikvah, we don't make a gzeira l'gzeira, and it should be permissible. She should not have to go back to the mikvah. Why? Because that is a decree to a decree. The rabbis normally only made one level of decrees. They didn't make a gzeira l'gzeira. They didn't start prohibiting us on, well, this might lead a person to make a mistake here, and therefore, and that will lead someone to make another mistake. And that, they didn't make all these decrees. It's one decree. The Torah has rules, and the rabbis added an extra law to protect the Torah. Now, are they going to also add a law to protect their law, which is protecting the Torah law? That's already taking it too far. And we have a source in the Torah that says, "Asu mishmeres limishmarti," make a gzeira for my laws, but don't make a gzeira for a gzeira. There is such a teaching in there is a source that we're not supposed to make a gzeira on a gzeira, a decree on top of a decree, and therefore that should be okay. I mentioned to you earlier that case of the ring that's on that that woman goes to mikvah with a ring. So this is a minority on the minority of her body, and it's something that seemingly she's not makbid on. She has no problem keeping on. She's not particular about it that it's on, and therefore seemingly it should be okay. But the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch says that we are machmir on all type of intervening substances. So that's what I mentioned. I don't know the Sephardic poskim agree with that, because the Ramah is generally the source of Ashkenazic authoritative halacha. So I'm not sure what the Sephardic poskim would say. I'd have to find out. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, well, when it comes to a ring, I know that a woman is not supposed to wear jewelry on Shabbos because she, even though it's something that she's wearing, she might take it off in the street to show to her friend.
Now, I don't know if that would mean that it's something that she's makbid on. That's an interesting thing. You're taking that's interesting source that you want to say, that you see from the fact that a woman might want to show it to someone. That would mean that she doesn't want it to stay on, that she wants to take it off. I don't know if we would take it that far. I have to think about that. That's an interesting point, Mordechai. I like it. Very good connection. I'm not sure if you're taking it too far. Yes, Jeffrey.
Well, I'm a Kohen, so I'm always thinking about the man going to the mikveh. Does the Kohen Gadol get completely undressed 5 times on Yom Kippur? Or is he allowed to keep some of his clothing on while he goes into the mikveh so many times?
Well, I would say there's other issues that you'll get into if he would wear wear clothing. The fact that washing the clothing and so on, these are issues with wearing clothing. So the understanding is that he takes everything off.
But I always thought about it that
Right.
way.
Right.
But it is something that might require a lot of help, right? Because let's say he got a little bit older, and
Right. Right.
it takes a long time, he's keeping everybody waiting, et cetera, right?
Right.
Okay, I think in any case, it's good to think about men going to the mikveh also.
Right. The thing with men is that I would think that men are a lot less particular than women, so there would be more room for leniency for men. For example, if there's a drop of blood on a scab or something, person has a scab. So for a woman, they're careful that it shouldn't have like much of the scab. I don't know exactly what they wash it with water and rub it a little and try that there shouldn't be dead skin and things like that. With a man, we're not makbid. So because we're not particular about these things, there seem to be, and we're not obligated in going to the mikveh. Our mikveh is more of an act of holiness and purity, and for Shabbos, and even a mikveh after a person has relations, or if he has a wet dream, even then it's not necessarily an obligation. Initially, there was such an obligation in order to daven.
It's a tefillah.
Yeah. And there's discussion about it. Maybe it's only to learn Torah. There's not an obligation. Maybe to daven there is, but the generally accepted view is that it's not an obligation. It's only an act of purity.
So we don't say a bracha.
Don't say a bracha, but also we're much more lenient in even in other words, if the Ramah says that you have to be careful, even any intervening substance, which is beyond the letter of the law, but the Ramah says that that's the appropriate thing to do, I don't think it would apply to men. In other words, according to halacha, it's fine. It's not covering the majority of your body, and it's not something that you're particular about. So for a woman, yes, that's the Ramah paskins that way, fine. But for a man who's not obligated in the first place to go to mikveh, do you have to take on such a stringency that even intervening substance that's according to halacha, even according to rabbinic laws, it's kosher. Would you have to go that far? So that's why I'm mentioning that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that. Okay, so that's basically the Gemara from yesterday, and I'm just going to read that inside. Veligzar on 4 lines from the top of the page 6b, 4 lines from the top of the page. I'm going to pull up the art scroll here. I'll tell you where we are. 6b. 6b1, the second paragraph. Okay, so the Gemara says, "V'ligzar nami al miyutay she'enay makbid mishum miyutay hamakbid." Let us make a decree. I just said this outside, but I'm just going to read it inside because I don't think we actually read it yesterday. So v'ligzar nami, let us also make a decree for a case where it's miyutai, it's on the minority of the body. She'enai makbid is not particular about. Mishum miyutai hamakbid, because of the minority, because of a case where a person would have a minority that he is particular about. And this would be similar. It happens to be he's not particular about it, but it's still in the same amount. It's a minority of the body. And if a person, we okay his mikvah, in this scenario, it could make a mistake. So it could be very similar to the other scenario where he is particular about it. Inami, or another reason would be to make this decree, mishum rubai she'enai makbid, because sometimes someone will have on the majority of their body, if they have an intervening substance, and even though so even though he only has an intervening substance on the minority of his body, but the difference between a minority of his body and majority of the body sometimes is very little. This is a little less than half, and that's a little more than half. So we should make a decree of a person who has a substance that's an intervening substance that's on the minority of his body, because of a case where it's on the majority of the body. It's very similar, and he's not particular about it, and it's still prohibited if it's on the majority of the body according to rabbinic law. So the Gemara answers, "He gufa gzeira." That itself is a decree. That itself is a decree. Va'ana nekim nigzer gzeira l'gzeira, and we should get up and make a decree for a decree on top of another decree. Which basically what the Gemara is saying is, don't think that the case where we prohibited these intervening substances are biblical. Those cases themselves were rabbinic. Those two cases that we had. If it's on the majority, but he's not particular, or if it's on the minority, but he is particular. Those two cases where we prohibited, don't think those are biblical, or those are halach l'maisha misinai. Those are laws given to Moses at Sinai. Those themselves were rabbinic decrees, and therefore, this would be considered a decree on top of a decree. So sort of like the Gemara is clarifying that don't think all of these cases that we just mentioned are part of the halach l'maisha misinai. The only thing that's halach l'maisha misinai is the case where it's on the majority of the body and you're particular about it. That's when it is prohibited. In all the other cases, according to the halacha given to Moses at Sinai, it would be permitted. But rabbinically, there are cases where it's prohibited. And then there's cases where it's even permitted rabbinically, and that would be when it's on the minority of the body and it's not something that you're not particular about it. That would be a case where even rabbinically it should be permitted. And of course, I mentioned that we're machmir now to not even have such a intervening substance called a chatzitza. So then the Gemara says, let's pick the third case. We've already gone through two of the cases of halacha l'maisha misinai. So now we're up to the third case, and believe it or not, this is the main purpose of this whole Gemara, is for the third case. We've just spent a few days studying, really going off on a tangent, studying about the laws of mikvah, studying about the halachas of measurements, and now we're getting back to the purpose of what we brought this for, and that is mechitzah. We had a whole discussion about the minimum size of a sukkah. And the minimum size of a sukkah, we said we could learn from the kruvim, that we wanted to say if the wings of the kruvim, of the cherubs, are on top of 10 handbreadths, that means that the minimum size of the hollow of a sukkah is 10 handbreadths. And when you have wings on top of that, it uses the word seichachim, schach, that's like the roof on top of 10 handbreadths. Teaches us that 10 handbreadths is the size of a sukkah, of a wall of the hollow of the sukkah. The problem we had was that one of the rabbis holds that it's not really on the cherubs that amount, that measurement, but the cherubs are actually a little bigger than that. They're actually taller than that because the ark was only 8.5. The ark, together with the cover of the ark, was only 8.5 handbreadths, which meant that the cherubs' wings were 11.5 handbreadths on top of 11.5 handbreadths of hollow. And that basically ruins our whole understanding that that schach, the minimum amount of schach, is 10 handbreadths, not 11.5. So we need to find a source for the 10 handbreadth measurement. If it was 11.5, we would be fine. But we know that the amount is 10 handbreadths, and we know that because our Mishnah said that. And no one argued on Mishnah that 10 handbreadth measurement is a solid measurement of 10 handbreadths of hollow. And so we need to find a source. And the source that the Gemara said, according to this view, is the halacha l'maisha misinai, that mechitzin is 10 handbreadths. That it's the size of a wall is 10 handbreadths, and that make that would basically teach us that a sukkah is 10 hand, the minimum size of a wall of a sukkah, besides for the schach, would be 10 hand. So mechitzin, in the laws of mechitza, hada amaran, is what we said, that's the size of that's a halacha l'meisha misin. So how do we know? If someone asks you, how do you know that a sukkah has to be minimally 10 handbreadths tall? So you would tell, well, it's a halacha l'meisha misinai. We don't have a source in Chumash. It's a halacha given to Moses at Sinai that the size is 10 handbreadths, and that fits with Reb Yehuda. According to Reb Meir, the size would have been the source would be the cherubs. The cherubs' wings are 10 handbreadths above empty space on top of the ark. Now the Gemara says, so what is Reb Meir going to do with this tradition given to Moses at Sinai? What does he do with that halacha l'meisha misina? So the Gemara says, mechitzin hada hanicha l'Reb Yehuda. This is good according to Reb Yehuda, that Reb Yehuda holds that you basically need this lesson of halacha given to Moses at Sinai. You need this to teach you the minimum size of a sukkah. Ela Reb Meir, ma'ikal Meimar. But what is you going to say? According to Reb Meir, you don't need this halacha l'meisha misinai because we learn it from the cherub's wings. So the Gemara answers, Ela Reb Meir, ma'ikal Meimar. Gemara answers, ki asi hilchasa. What is the halacha l'meisha misinai coming for? It's coming to teach you legud, the law of good atzik and good achis. What is the law of good? The law of good is where we learned a little before about, we're going to have more cases as well, and that had to do with even if your schach is not touching your walls, it's kosher, even the way the Florida sukkah is made, which is that you have a wall on the bottom and it only goes up, most of the simple cases, it goes up 4 feet. That's the typical case here in Florida. And the rest of your sukkah, which is really another 4 empty feet, that wall doesn't have to be there because we have a law called the halacha l'meisha misinai. Even Reb Meir holds of this halacha l'meisha misinai. What is it applicable for? Not to teach you need 10 handbreadths, but to teach you that even if the wall doesn't go all the way up to the schach, we say a special rule of good asit. Good asit means we lift up the wall to the roof, even though it doesn't go all the way up there. Now, let me ask you a question. What about if you have a wall, you want to make an interesting sukkah, and you want to put the wall on the top half? What would happen then? Can you put the wall and say, you know what? I'm putting a frame. I have my 4 beams, and I got my nice sukkah here. But you know what? I want, this is good for kids. They can walk through the bottom. The kids can fit right through. It looks cool, something modern art. I'm going to have my wall on the top half of the sukkah. And would that be a kosher sukkah? And yes, Reuven.
Well, it states that the wall has to be from the bottom so the animals can come inside.
Yeah, there is something about that.
That's why you can have such a big opening on the bottom of the wall. So forget about you putting the wall on the top, because they already talk about a little space on the bottom that you can't have.
I have to remember exactly what that applies to. I think you're bringing in you're bringing in something correct. You're remembering something about the law of Arabs and things, but I don't know if it's exact.
It's
I'll have to look it up. I'm gonna check it up. I don't remember exactly where it says it, but you're right about the goats or something coming through.
Small animals.
What is that, Ezra? What?
Small animals cannot
Small animals.
Your wall.
But the official rule of good asik which meant that the walls can be extended upward, it also applies downward. So if you have schach on the walls attached to your schach, there is a rule about the walls being able to be extended downward. I'm not exactly sure the details. We're going to soon learn about it, but of course what Ruvain mentioned here, we'll have to check up exactly how that how that applies. But there is such a rule about that. But there is the concept of good asik doesn't only apply upward, but there's another term used for extending downward, and that's called good achis. That the wall can be extended downward as well. So so that also is part of this law of good of halacha l'moshe misinai. And then there's also a concept of lavud, and the concept of lavud is something that we've also learned about. Lavud is the concept of anything within 3 handbreadths is considered attached. And the law of Daif and Akuma, where the wall can be considered bent up to 4 amos, up to 4 cubits. And that's also a way of koshering a sukkah. And what we're seeing over here as well is this concept of halacha l'moshe misinai, a tradition given to Moses at Sinai, that it actually comes to be lenient rather than to be strict. So you would think, oh, there was a tradition given to Moses at Sinai, oh, it must be adding another law. No, it's actually coming to qualify and permit certain things that you would think would not be permissible. And that's all these 3 cases are all cases of leniency. The wall doesn't have to reach up to the roof. The lavud can attach things that aren't attached. And for example, if your schach doesn't reach all the way to the wall, and so you have the law of lavud. And if you have holes within your walls, or holes within the schach, there's a law of lavud, and it attaches things that are within 3 handbreadths to each other. And you have the law of Daif and Akuma, which basically allows you your wall that's far away from the schach to be considered attached to the schach. So there's a lot of leniencies, and these are all part of the halacha l'moshe misinai. Okay, so that's basically the Gemara. So it comes out that there's the halacha l'moshe misinai everyone agrees with. There is a halacha l'moshe misinai. The question is, what does it include? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it also includes teaching you that a law of a wall is 10 handbreadths. According to Rabbi Meir, you don't need to learn it from the halacha l'moshe misinai. So the halacha is not teaching you that, but it's teaching you the other laws. They're teaching you the laws of this good asik, good achis, lavud, daif and akuma, and so on and so forth, and which we'll see more about. Now, the Gemara now jumps to the law of having 3 walls. And this concept of having 3 walls is also a very unique law, because the law of 3 walls, the Gemara starts off telling us that the 2 walls have to be normal walls, and the 3rd wall is going to be even kosher, even if it's like a tiny wall. It's a tefach, a handbreadth width would be good enough for this 3rd wall. Let's read it inside. Let's learn it inside. V'she'ein la shalish tefanos. If it doesn't have 3 walls, so the Gemara says Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa, Shtayim kihilchasa. 2 walls are, as the halacha teaches, they need to be 7 handbreadths wide. That's the width of a wall of a sukkah is 7 handbreadths, which we learned a number of times, and we spoke about it at length, where you get the size 7, and it had to do with sitting in the sukkah, the majority of the body, and the table, right? And that's where we came up with the 7 handbreadths. So 2 of the walls of the sukkah need to be 7 handbreadths. Vushlishes afilu tefach. And the 3rd one is even if it's only a tefach, a handbreadth. And that's the first opinion. The second opinion is Reb Shimon Omer, shalosh kehilchasan. 3 walls have to be proper walls. And the Revius afilu tefach, and the fourth one could even be 1 handbreadth. So here we have this another leniency regarding the walls of the sukkah, that the walls of the sukkah, how many do you need? So you either just need 2 regular walls, and the third one could be like a semi-wall, a tefach, a handbreadth. I mean, that's tiny. And the other opinion is you need 3 walls. You still don't need. Then the fourth wall could be just a handbreadth. And now the Gemara is going to want to figure out what is the source of these 2 opinions. But my komiflik, what are they arguing? Where do they get their rule from? So Rabbanan Savri Yeshem L'Maseiris, the rabbis hold that there is a priority to the Maseiris, to the tradition, the way something is given over and spelled, the way it was written in the Torah. Reb Shimon Savar Yesh Aim Lamikra, the Iker, the main thing, the main way of darshaning, of understanding, teaching a law, is the way it's read, not the way it's spelled. In other words, how do you expound something? There are times in the Torah where something is written one way, and the way it's read is a little different. Do you expound it based on the way it's written or the way it's read, the way you pronounce it? Does it go by pronunciation, or does it go by the way it's written? And I'm going to stop here. We're going to continue this tomorrow. Mitzvah Hashem. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.